Hi, everyone. I hope that was enough time. What do you think, Zach?
We're live.
Great. Hi, I'm Danielle Ames Spivak. People are going to start trickling right now, but we want to start on time. I'm the CEO of the Friends of the Israel Philharmonic. I'm so excited to have my good friend Noa Tishby here today. Noa and I talk often and actually have a regular show together on Thursdays on Clubhouse, which is a fairly new social media app that's like an interactive podcast. And the show that Noa and I co-host with Shani Suisa is called Hummus Thursdays. So I feel like this is a special edition Hummus Tuesdays, since we're here on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And, I'm really excited to dive in with you and obviously, acknowledge that this is the start this evening in Israel of Yom HaZikaron leading into Yom HaTzmaut. But before we dive into that, and for those who maybe didn't read the great bio that we circulated about Noa basically is a household name in Israel, a very accomplished actress and performer and singer, and who then moved to the US at a very young age and made quite a name in Hollywood as a producer, an executive producer for In Treatment, which was the first Israeli treatment of a show that was brought to the United States and obviously started a huge trend that hasn't stopped and is just growing exponentially. So you've always been a trendsetter and a leader. And now you've written this incredible book called Israel. And I actually have the book in the other room. I wanted to have it in front of me and I didn't get it. Do you have it there?
I do. Right here.
So good. I love the cover. So we're going to get into the book in a second, but back to, Yom HaZikaron being this evening, because that's the theme of this episode of ours, is really acknowledging what this day means in Israel and to people around the world so they really can understand. So I'm interested to know from you, growing up in Israel, what did Yom HaZikaron mean to your family? How did you recognize it? And, just from your perspective.
So first of all, hi everyone. I know you guys are watching live, so I can't see everybody on the screen, but hello, we're very excited to be here. Danielle and I just doing this face to face. My book just came out. It's called Israel, A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on Earth. And I read this book because I needed this book. I've been looking for a way to explain Israel to people in a way that's easy to understand, that's fun, it's relatable, it's quick, relatively quick, and isn't a little draining like some of these incredible history books can be. And I knew that it wasn't out there. So I just kind of decided to write it. And a big part of this is I'm basically telling the story of Israel through the story of my family. So my family has been heavily involved in establishing the country, in the Zionist movement and in politics. And I go into it in depth in the book. But one of the things that I touch upon, which was extremely personal to me, was Yom HaZikaron and our family and the history of our family. And this is something that it was different because I've been in the Israeli entertainment industry for so long. So I feel like I've given a million interviews, and I feel like a lot of people in Israel really know a lot of things about me, but I've never spoken about this issue in that way. So my mom's first husband was a pilot and a fighter pilot. And on December 1st, 1967, his plane was shot by the Egyptian military in the War of Attrition, and it fell into the Suez Canal, and it was never recovered. So my mom became a widow at 26 with a toddler and a baby, my 3-year-old sister Mira and my 1.5-year-old sister Michal. And this obviously happened before I was born, but what I talk about in the book was how it affected me as a person, and how it affected me psychologically, how it affected the entire family, growing up with this kind of a loss, and running the reader through the process, the psychological process that I had to unpack in order to undo this pain, was a very revealing thing to me. A lot of Israelis who read this, and my mom cried when she read this, and Israelis who read this were kind of shocked that I go into it. but I used it in order to kind of illustrate from a personal standpoint, the price of war and the psychological pain that every family goes through. Even me, who's technically, I didn't go through the loss. You know what I mean? Like, it was always, as a child, I was always like, oh, why am I sad about something that didn't even happen to me? But it did, in a way. And every family in Israel goes through this. Every family in Israel has someone that they know that either lost their life or was wounded. And it's something it's a cloud that's hovering over the nation in a way that's, well, hopefully we'll be able to not have to deal with anymore. But it's definitely there. So I wanted to make sure in the book that people in America kind of get what it's like to grow up in the shadow of Yom HaZikaron, of Memorial Day, and of this kind of a loss.
So, you often say that you're 100% American and 100% Israeli. And so, I mean, we could talk.
Terrible in math. That's why I say that. Terrible.
So, we could talk for an hour just about resiliency, especially during the year that we've all had over the last year. No time better to talk about resiliency than now. But as being an Israeli, who obviously your family had the experience, and probably in other ways too, not just from the loss of your mother's first husband, but I'm sure there's been other loss in your friends and extended family. Now being an American and understanding American culture, how do Israelis process trauma, or do you think they're more resilient than Americans, or you're so accustomed to this, unfortunately now. Do you think it makes Israelis stronger?
I think it unfortunately does. There's a whole thing of like, how do you raise children to have adversity without going through major trouble? Like, we know that a certain level of adversity and a certain level of challenge makes a strong person. I think that, yes, Israelis process pain in a, like, kind of deal with it in a much more head-on kind of a way. I also talk about in my book about the difference between like the shock that I had when I came to the States and like Memorial Day was coming up. And I was like, okay, what are we doing? Are we going to a ceremony? Are we going to a service? Like, what are we doing? And my friends were like, oh, we're barbecuing. And I'm like, what? What do you mean? Like, I was shocked by this, right? But I think that's something in the Jewish way of dealing with death. It's not just an Israeli way. It's a Jewish way. Like, we have a lot of rituals and ceremonies that have to do with like birth and death and burial and Shiva and all of that. And it's a very powerful structure to deal with pain. There's also the days of like how many days you're supposed to sit Shiva and what are you supposed to do when somebody passes, or, we have a lot of these customs and traditions in our kind of like in our DNA. So I think in a way, the Jewish tradition has a lot to teach the rest of the world on how to deal with pain. And unfortunately, Israel deals with it more powerfully and more palatably and on a daily basis.
It's so interesting that Yom HaZikaron rolls into Yom HaAtzmaut, which is Israel's Day of Independence. Can you talk about what that feels like actually to be in Israel and kind of go from this really solemn, somber day? I mean, I know you said some people barbecue, but at the end of the day.
No, that's in Memorial Day here.
Oh, Memorial Day here, right.
Yeah,
so in Israel, can you contrast that a little bit with, how it feels in Israel to go from that really somber day to Yom HaAtzmaut, which is, I guess, one of the happiest, if not the happiest day of the year.
Yeah, for sure. It was done on purpose. The connecting these two was done on purpose. I think it's very clever, and it's very, it matures you as a person from a very young age. These two things are intertwined. Like the fact that we have a country for the first time in like thousands of years is something that we should never take for granted. And the fact that it cost us is something that we shouldn't we should never forget. So it's it's a very interesting 48 hours. Like the day starts at 8:00 at night, 8 p.m. tonight. Now, it happened a few hours ago in Israel, and there's the siren goes off and the whole country stands still. And it's, as an adult, it's beautiful. Like you drive on a freeway and everybody stops the cars and get out of the car and bow their heads and like take kind of like a moment of silence. As a child, you stand in class the next morning and you just pray to God that you won't crack up laughing, because that's legitimately what happens. Because and then somebody starts giggling and everybody starts giggling and you're like a 6-year-old and you feel terrible, but it's okay. It's a Jewish sense of humor. And it's children, but it's something that you can't escape. There's it's the music and the movies, and everybody kind of shuts down and, like, out of respect, kind of take a step back, and every family with their own fallen or wounded or somebody who's died in a terrorist attack. And then at 11 o'clock in the morning, there's another siren. And then the evening starts the celebration of Independence Day, which is massive parties. So you just kind of have this, like, all right, we're going to stop for a second. We're going to, remember the price that we paid. And then, like, okay, we're here, we're alive. Am Yisrael Chai, let's go for it. And I think it's a huge thing about Israelis, connecting these two, but also just knowing to enjoy life, like, right now, because it's not, we shouldn't take it for granted.
Mm-hmm. So, well, you know how much I loved your book. That's not a secret.
I didn't know that.
And
I'll say, Danielle's one of my, like, first and biggest fans. Like, she read the book before it came out, and she called me up and she's like, oh my God, she was very complimentary. So, and I would be forever grateful for Danielle. So, your support is just amazing. It really is.
For those who haven't read it yet, and I hope everyone does soon, it's really interesting in that, first of all, Noa is the first woman who's ever written a book on the history of Israel. So amazing.
Let's just preface that, because we have to. But yeah, it's the first history book about Israel that's ever been written by a woman, excluding Golda Meir's biography. And there's also Professor Anita Shapiro, who's an amazing Israeli professor who wrote some books in Hebrew. They were translated to English, like, in the 90s, which is great, but there's never been an American woman to write a history book about Israel ever before. So kind of shocking.
And it's a history book, but it's also a memoir. And you talked about this at the beginning, how it's really the story of your family. And I want you to tell us a little bit more about your mother and your grandfather and your grandmother. There's so many people in your family I want to talk about. So let's get back to the family stuff in a second. But since this is the Friends of the Israel Philharmonic, what type of music did you listen to growing up in Israel?
Oh my God. Okay. So I feel like I need to touch on my mom for a little bit before I talk about this, Okay. So my mom is amazing. She's one of the most powerful women ever out there. She's like, she was like New York swimming champion at, like, the age of 12. She was this diver. She was like a marine archaeologist. She now specializes in ballistic missiles. She crossed the border to meet with Arafat to Ramallah when, like, we thought he was going to actually bring peace. She, like, fights with the government. She's amazing. She fights with the government she's fought with the government for many, many years to look for Aki's airplane, her first husband's airplane. Like, she's a real warrior, and very much a kibbutz girl, right? She's got short hair. She never put makeup on. She's got no pierced ears. She never wear high heels. She's very much like, she's like a dude, right? She's like, I write about her that she's literally like, let's arm yourself with facts and go get into some good trouble. Like, she's really that woman. You don't want to be on her bad side when she's, like, fighting for justice. You really don't. She's, like, super smart.
You're nothing like her, Noa.
I aspire to be as, like, knowledgeable and, like, learned and, like, she's so good with analyzing, like, political situations all over the world. She's brilliant. And she grew up, my grandfather was a diplomat. So she grew up in New York when he was in the United Nations, and then in Africa when he was Israel's first ambassador, first representative of Israel to the continent of Africa. So she grew up all over the world. So she's, my mom only listened to classical music. But, like, when I say only listen to classical music and opera, I don't mean, and some Frank Sinatra. Or, like, and a little bit of Beatles, because, like, Beatles, right? No. I mean, only classical music. Morning to night, I would wake up in the morning on Saturdays, and it, like, opera would be blasting through, like, the radio or whatever. Literally, that's the only thing she listened to. As a result, I got very annoyed by classical music as a child. Like, really annoying. You rebel against your parents. I'm like, I can't listen to this anymore, right? I was like I for years as a young adult refused to listen to classical music, completely refused, right? And she's like upset, so she goes to concert, her and my sisters as well, like it's a huge thing in our family, right? And I was like, I don't care, I'm gonna listen to everything else except that. And when I grew up, and for years, that's what happened. Like I wouldn't go to concerts, I wouldn't listen to classical music, I would never have like the tuned on like in the car, never. And then when at some point, when I became kind of like a young adult, I found myself kind of listening, venturing towards it a little bit. And I found something really interesting. I'm going to say it in a funny way, right? So pardon the terminology.
You always say stuff in a funny way.
The terminology is on purpose. Okay. I realized that I know all the songs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Like every single yetzirah, composition? How do you say yetzirah? Yeah. Composition. I literally knew all of them. Like something would come up and I'm like, like I know all of them because I grew up with it. So it's when I like growing up, obviously I went back and I'm like, oh my God, this is brilliant. And you know, Mozart and Bach, and my mom is all about Tchaikovsky and Mahler. She's very much into Mahler. And she's like, I don't care that he was a Nazi.
Well, that's funny. We did an event a few weeks ago, a month or so ago. Anyway, so
but I
similar topic.
I am more of a pop culture girl, so like you can't go wrong with Mozart. Really, let's just get straight.
Okay. So for everyone who doesn't know, you ended up going on to being a star of musical theater in Israel. So clearly it did have some, you know, influence on you, the music growing up in some way. Can you tell everyone about what you did in theater and musical theater?
So my my training is actually in music and singing and in musical theater. So I started singing at a very young age. I don't know if it's like directly connected to it or maybe not even at all, but like I started singing at a very young age and I got a scholarship from the Tel Aviv Museum of Arts when I was 14 and started taking it professionally. And I played Anita and like Habima National Theater production of West Side Story. And I put an album out and I had a record deal in the US. Like music was a big part, was a huge part of my life. And I, you know, I came to the States and was signed to MCA Records. So, you know, big record deal, 6 albums, like a very big deal, and traveled all over the world. They sent me to work with like the best producers in the world, like that worked with like.
No, that is such a huge deal.
It was big, but it failed miserably because the record label folded. It was a whole thing. It was the turn of, you know, it was like 2000 and then everything kind of went to hell. But I got to, like, I had these 2.5 years in which I was literally recording with the most successful producers in the world. And it was kind of like, it was really fun. But then the record label folded. So nothing happened out of it. And it was one of those moments in my life at the time after the label folded that I kind of went with the power of inertia and kept on recording and kept performing. I actually played at the Viper Room, which was really great. Wow. I know. And it was kind of like the power of inertia. I was kind of like, yeah, I'm going to continue writing my music and doing my thing. And then at some point I had to stop and really get real with myself. I was like, okay, do I really want to do this? Like, if I don't sing, am I gonna like die? Like, do I feel like the world is missing the greatest, the most important talent ever if I don't? And I'm like, no, I was like, out of like the creative expression that I like, the palette of creative expressions that I enjoy using, I was like, I don't think I need to sing anymore. I just don't think I want to do this. I was like, am I going to be happy with the process or just with the result? And to me at the time, it was, no, I love it. If you put me on stage and let me sing, that's great. But if I need to be in the studio for 12 hours, I'm going to shoot myself. Whereas now, for example, the process of writing this book, like every single point of creating this book was so enjoyable to me, from like writing the proposal to getting the deal to writing the book. It's draining and it's a lot, but it was so inspiring and so much fun. And I enjoyed sitting for like, you know, it was a little less than 1.5 years, but like sitting on my own and just writing was so enjoyable. So I think as a creative person, you really have to decipher where do you enjoy the process and not just like the fruit at the end. And I love it. So yeah, music was a big part of my life. And at some point I was like, I'm done. But I still enjoy good karaoke.
You've moved on to bigger and better things. So you have a lot of friends in Hollywood. We know that. And you also wrote this book for people that you've met in Hollywood, but around the world, including young people who maybe don't know that much about Israel. So,
Yeah.
you get this all the time, I'm sure, with every interview you do, but what are the few things about Israel, either things you've conveyed in the book or things you didn't convey, but you want people to know about Israel that maybe don't know?
Well, first of all, everybody that's watching this right now have been in a situation in which we had to explain Israel and didn't know exactly how. Like we're missing but how do I explain it in a way that's easy to understand? So that's what this is for, right? For like to buy this to your son, your daughter, your granddaughter, your friends, their friends in college, like this is the book that they need. Like we know what the problems are about Israel. Like we know this but we don't know what to do about it. So that's why I wanted to fill that void and give our community this tool because I needed that tool. Like I had all these people like, can you give me a book? And I'm like, not really. I mean, I do, but I'm not sure you'll read it. And this one, it's like, no, this is a fun one. Go, you'll read it and you'll get some stuff out of it. So we've all experienced the misinformation. I'm sure literally everybody that's watching this right now has their own story about somebody that said something anywhere from the beginning when I used to come to the States at the beginning, when I started coming to the States and people didn't realize that Israel is a modern country at all. Like they literally were like, they thought it's Afghanistan, right? Didn't know anything about that, to like now when like there's a lot of conversations about apartheid and colonialism, which is crazy, which it really leads to people having to get straight with themselves on whether or not they think the Jews should have a state. And this is to me something that so goes without saying that I just needed to make this case for the new generation. And just to combat all the crap that we're all dealing with all the time.
Both you and I have been talking a lot to college students, current and recent graduates who are facing this on campuses right now. So what advice do you have for either kids who are in college or going to college or their parents? Because we know that the climate is not that comfortable if you're Jewish or publicly or not even publicly Zionist on campus.
Well, in order to become a part of liberal circles on campuses, you need to denounce Israel. Like they literally won't let you be a Zionist and a liberal, which is crazy. There is a real infiltration of nefarious powers on college campuses that is sponsored by people that you would want nothing to do with them, that is hiding its agenda by design. I'm talking about BDS. BDS is a movement that does not want Israel to exist, but they try to pretend like they are about Israeli government's policies. They are not. They're literally about dismantling Israel as a state, period, end of story. Their founder says that flat out. That's what they want. Palestine will be free from the river to the sea it's a literal chant. This is literally what they want. If you have anybody who's going to college, who's on campus, who's about to go to campus, who's been to college, who's like a young professional, they need to know their facts before they get there, because they will get bombarded and they will be put in a position and having to answer. And BDS is bad news and they need to be ousted from like liberal society. And the thing is that, look, they're just hiding what they're about, which is why they're able to attract so many kind of like young people and liberal people and all that. They're pretending to be a movement that's about like justice and peace and this woke kind of lingo. No, absolutely not. They're a movement which wants a state which exists to not exist anymore.
Well, my favorite chapter in the book is the BDS chapter. So we don't have the time today to get into it, but I highly encourage everyone to pick it up and read it. So
I'm taking them on. I'm ripping them a new a-hole, pardon my French. Like this is no joke. Like we really need to single them out, and we need to shame them into the corner, and we need to make sure that nobody in their right mind in politics, in government, or general population aligns themselves with them. Absolutely not.
you're the perfect ambassador, Noah, because you're just a person, right? You're not a politician. You're just a person. You happen to be a successful person, a talented person, a pretty famous person. But still, you're just talking from the heart, and that's why your book is so powerful. So I want to know what you think about the Abraham Accords and what we have to look forward to. But first, I want to know, what happens? I know you're an amazing cook. You often have guests for Shabbat. I know when you go home to Israel, you have Shabbat with your family. What are the things that you talk about at your Shabbat table that are not in the book, or you don't necessarily always publicly talk about, whether it's going on in Israel or otherwise?
So one of the things that I love about Shabbat is the whole kind of like tradition and concept that you should not be talking about mundane stuff, that you should be talking about, anything other than a mundane. So what I try to do on my Shabbats is do this combination of like a meditation, self-help, Burning Man kind of a thing. And we sit down, we'll eat before or after, we do a little pray, we do like a prayer, we do the whatever traditions that, with the challah and the wine and all of that. And then we'll go over the table, and I'll often we'll start kind of like a discussion of like, all right, what did you accomplish in the past week? What would you like to share about it? And what are you committed to for next week? So it gets everybody to a place when they drop in and they talk authentically and they share from their heart. And it creates a real magical evening, which is an anchor for the week, and also definitely not mundane. Like it's definitely unique. And I just think Shabbat is such an amazing tradition. It just is. And I just can't stand this pandemic anymore, because I haven't had a Shabbat dinner in a year, actually more, since March-ish. So yeah, I really miss it in my life. I got a new dinner table, and I can't wait to start again.
Okay. And then, so back to the Abraham Accords, because I feel like we've talked about a lot of the challenges we have already in this conversation, but what are the things you think we have to look forward to?
I think the Abraham Accord are amazing. Absolutely amazing. What happened with them is a couple of things happened. First of all, let's get straight here. We took the relationship public. Like this was kind of like an affair, like a mistress. Israel was like the Gulf states mistress, and we just they proposed in a way, or we proposed, or whatever. We decided to kind of like make it official, which is extraordinary. So what the Abraham Accord basically did was they broke the Arab League's kind of like resistance to moving anywhere without a Palestinian resolution. And the problem with a Palestinian resolution right now is that there has to be leaders on both sides that are willing to sit down and think differently and actually commit to it. But what happened with the Abraham Accord was that Bahrain and the UAE, and now Morocco and Sudan and Saudi Arabia, hopefully at some point, they're acknowledging publicly what everybody in the region knew for a very long time, but this is the first time they're actually putting pen to paper and saying, yeah, that's what's happening. That Israel's not the biggest problem in the Middle East, but Iran is. And all of these countries, the moderate countries in the region, including Israel, need to like kind of join hands and fight against the real threat to the region and the real destabilizing power in the region, which is the Iranian regime, which wants to enact an Islamist Sharia state all over starting with the Middle East and going all over the world. And I think it's incredible. I think that it's probably Jared Kushner's kind of design, which is great. And we'll see. I hope many more will join in. This is absolutely extraordinary.
And I know you mentioned actually at a conversation we had, and then I saw some articles about how Yom HaShoah has been celebrated, or not celebrated, sorry, but recognized in the Arab world recently.
It's amazing. There were like representatives from like UAE and Bahrain, I think Saudi Arabia as well, like celebrating the Holocaust Memorial Day with like Israelis, like in official ceremonies. This is like, if you tell us this like last year, we'd be like, absolutely not. This is absolutely amazing. So I'm very hopeful in that sense, because the book ends on a hopeful note. Like, the thing is that there is no, not that there is no, the conflict in the region should not be thought of from the prism of an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's an Israeli-Arab world conflict, and as such, it needs to be resolved. Okay, so the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one aspect of it, but there's an Israeli-Arab world conflict that has been going on for about a century, and the Arab countries are like, they're implicit in perpetuating this problem with the Palestinians. We all need to solve this, and I hope that with what had happened right now, or starting to happen with the Abraham Accord, more and more countries will come to the table until eventually we can kind of come to a resolution, both with the Palestinians and with the region, and join hands. Like, if all the Arab countries would join hand with Israel, everybody can flourish. I mean, this would be better for everybody. Like, enough with this propaganda, anti-Zionist and anti-Jewish propaganda all over the region. Enough with that.
Okay, we're not stopping, but I do want to just tell everyone, please use the chat function and put in questions. Noa and I are going to keep talking, but soon we're going to take some questions. So, back to what you were talking about in terms of communication and dialogue, and we talk about this a lot from my perspective, working with an Israeli cultural institution that's such a gem and icon around the world. And you and what you've done with TV and other productions you've done in kind of cultural exchange like that, of how important it is to collaborate and share and talk, rather than that idea of kind of sticking to separate corners. So can we go back to what you've done with TV and bringing Israeli TV to the US? I know everyone watching is obsessed with some show. I mean, a few weeks ago, we had Lior Raz from Fauda on our show together, and that's your jam. So can you tell us a little bit about Israeli TV?
I do, but I want to say something to what you just said, that like everybody knows of the importance of collaboration and the importance of like cultural exchange and all of that. That's one of the main problems, other than like the fact that BDS don't want Israel to exist. Like, this doesn't make sense for any liberal to support BDS, because BDS want to boycott everything that has to do with Israel. Like, they're actually after boycotting relationships between Israelis and Palestinians, boycotting academia, boycotting any kind of exchange, boycotting financial possibilities for the Palestinians. Like, I don't see how a liberal would think that this would make sense. Like, we need more collaboration, more understanding, more multiculturalism, more like, cultures moving from one side to the next, more of this, not less of this. So, yeah,
I agree, because we educate thousands of kids every year, including Arab Israeli citizens, and we have an ensemble that's an IPO ensemble that's Arab and Jewish musicians that play together. So that's what we're all about, and the more we do that, the better.
Of course.
But tell us, okay, so what did you see happen when kind of Hollywood woke up and realized how creative Israelis are, and what good content is coming from Israel? And
it was literally like that. I mean, it was legit like that. It was kind of funny. So I was living in the States at the time, being a struggling actress who was like auditioning and being like, yeah, almost, but no, not really. Yeah, you're a second choice. You're a great second choice, but no, not really. And I have always been entrepreneurial. Like, I've always been producing. So I started producing as a teen and been involved in production since I was a kid, and creating formats and selling formats and whatever. And I kept looking for something to produce here, and been working on a bunch of stuff. And I suddenly heard about this show from Israel that just the description of the show sounded amazing. So I read about it in the newspaper, and it said, it's a therapy show, one-on-one therapy session. Asi Dayan, who's the son of Moshe Dayan, the general, plays a therapist, and he just basically has one patient, and they sit in a room and they talk. And I was like, wow, this is great. This is a great idea, right? And then I kind of forgot about it for a couple of months.
Hasn't either sat through or needs therapy, right?
I mean, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I mean, seriously. I actually had that thought as well. Like, why did I not think about this? This is great. So, but then I went to Israel for 2 days for my niece's bat mitzvah, and everybody was talking about the show, like everybody. And at some point, I just had one of these like aha moments, like legitimately remember where I sat in the car in a cab driving to a meeting with Zohar Jakobson, my manager. And I'm watching outside, and Zohar goes, wow, you have to watch Matthipur. It's so great. And I just went, oh, that's my show. Oh my God. It's like a thing. I could just take it.
What was your light bulb moment?
That was the light bulb moment. And I looked at Zohar, and I'm like, do you know the creator? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, do you have his phone number? She's like, yeah. And I'm like, call him right now. Call him. Like, I haven't watched a frame of the show. Right. but I'm like, everybody was talking about it. So it was obviously brilliant. And the idea was so great. So, and then,
anything, how did you know how to sell a show?
oh, I had no idea, but no idea. But she called a guy and I was like, what are you doing? We have to meet tomorrow. And it's, Noah, it's not about what you think it is, because I didn't want him to think that like I want a part in the show or something like that. And then I hung up the phone and I turned to Zohar and I'm like, can you get me a DVD of the show? I have to watch the show. I mean, like I literally haven't even watched the show. And then I watched it and I was like, oh my God, this is brilliant. This definitely is a format that I could adopt to the United States. And I came and I sat down with a creator and I said, I'm going to sell your show to HBO. And he looked at me as if I'm insane, because it's never been done before. Like it wasn't even addressed in the contracts. Like it was just never done before. It was never done. Nobody thought about that. So and I'm like, then he gave me a DVD with a translation of the first 5 episodes. And I kind of went, where do I start? And I called my lawyer and I'm like, how do I do this? And even my lawyer was amazing. I told him, so I have the rights for an Israeli show. And he said, okay. And like, it wasn't even, and I'm like, no, it can be adapted like an American show, but like a British show from we can like translate it and call it like, so it took a minute at the beginning. People were like, I don't get it. But luckily, actually, Ari Emanuel heard about the show and he was kind of looking for it as well. Like he heard about it. He probably had the same idea as I did of like, oh, I think this can be sold here. And then I heard about that and I'm like, I have the rights. I got them. I know. And we partnered up and did it together, partnered with Stephen Levinson and Mark Wahlberg. And we sold it to HBO, 145 episodes, 12 Emmys and Golden Globes, Peabody Award, and a 4th season that's in the making right now. And it created a market where a market did not exist before. Like it was one of those moments where the entire industry went like, wait, Israel? And boom, the whole Hollywood community like descended on Israel to grab like everything. And now, all you need to say is I have a format from Israel, and it's like the door slant, wide open. And it's incredible. It's extraordinary to watch. It's been
a few years ago, people were saying TV's dead. And now look, it's like the most alive ever. But so why do you think Israelis, and this ties into Yom HaTzmaut and celebrating Israel and creativity and culture, why do you think Israelis are so good at making TV scripts and concepts?
I've given this talk so many times, so I'll give you the short version. Like I've actually have like talks about this. The short version is money and pickiness. Okay. So there's no money in Israeli entertainment industry. There's no money in the entertainment industry at all. There's not enough people, right? So it's very, very, very cheap to produce there. There's just, you have to make it with a small budget. That's number one. But on the other side, there's a bunch of Israelis there that if it's not a good material, if it's nothing interesting, they'll just flick the channel and disappear. So you have to, there's a thing that's comparable in the music industry, right? In the music world, whereas a song needs to be amazing on a guitar. It can't, if it needs all the productions around it, it doesn't have the solid bone. Like Imagine doesn't need a big production. Imagine can be sung a cappella and it's an amazing song. Mm-hmm. It's the same with TV in the context of the page. So whereas the chords and the lyrics of the song is the words that are written on the page in TV, and they need to stand on their own, and the characters need to be strong, and the storyline needs to be amazing, and there is no possibility of putting on like a big production because there's just no money. There's just no budget for it. So it forces, it's like invention is the mother of all necessity. So it forces the creators to be very authentic, very deep, very thoughtful, very creative. And it really shows. It really shows. I recommend actually a new show that it hasn't sold in the US yet. And it's very upsetting. There's some sort of I don't know why. It's called Chazarot, rehearsals.
I love insider information. Tell us.
Inside info, right? It's on Khan 11. So it's on channel 11 Israel. It's not streaming in the US yet. So whoever has, I don't even know how you would get it right now, but if you speak Hebrew or if you, maybe it's translated to English, but look it up. It's called Rehearsals. And this is one of the best examples for these products that are just great. It's a show about a couple who is producing a show together for theater. That's it. There's nothing there other than that. There's no big concept, and it's just amazing. It just won all the TV awards in Israel. And when I was there in December or January, me and my sister and my brother-in-law just devoured it, the whole thing. Within, I was like, please don't end. It's like 8 or 10 episodes. It's so good. And it's a perfect example for that. Nothing but bare bones, nothing but chords and lyrics.
I mean, no, you're so relatively young, and look, you went from the star, the villain of Ramat Aviv Gimel, to now, literally changing the discourse when it comes to education and awareness and activism about Israel. So I'm excited to see where the next several decades take you, because you're incredible. But Zach, are you there? Can you tell us some questions from the audience?
Sure. We have an anonymous question that asks, Noa, what are some policies that make you hopeful for the future?
Oh, in America or in Israel?
They didn't specify. Let's do one in America and one in Israel.
Oof, what an interesting question. Well, in America, they've upped the number of refugees again. So 15,000 refugees, providing political asylum for 15,000 refugees, which was the Trump administration policy, is shameful. My son's nanny is a political refugee from El Salvador, and she needed this she needed the status, and she came to the US and she found a home. And there's no doubt that we can do better than 15,000. So I'm very happy about this policy that was just adjusted and being adjusted. And in Israel, let me think, what is kind of like a new policy? I'll tell you what I like that isn't actually a policy at all, right? I like that Israel never had a don't ask, don't tell in the military. It just was it never needed to be addressed because it was never a problem to begin with. So, when you were gay in the 60s in Israel, you were probably more closeted and hidden as you were all over the world, but there was never a discriminatory kind of military policy in which you couldn't talk about it in the same way that it was here. And obviously, as society transformed and became more accepting, obviously, it changed in Israel as well. So I love that Israel never had that. I'm sure that by the time, and the minute we finish this, I'd be like, oh, that policy would have been so much better to talk about. But these are the two ones that came to mind right now.
No, I mean, it reminds me of our conversation from earlier in the week about feminism and your grandmother who founded Degania, and how for all the bad press about Israel, there's just so much for rights and human rights and liberal rights that Israel has done way before the United States.
Way before the United States
have done. So I think that was an amazing answer. Yeah. Zach, anything else?
So Nathaniel asks, do you think the influx of Hollywood interest in Israeli entertainment will have positive effects on both nations' industries? And if so, how so?
Well, first of all, yes, the answer is yes. It already had a positive effect on both industries because it brought so many jobs into both industries. Like, it actually created jobs both in Israel and in the United States. There's a very powerful feeling to standing on a set of a television show and hundreds of people walking around and knowing for myself that this happened because of an aha moment that I had in a cab on the way to Netanya. So it's very humbling and and extraordinary. So it definitely had and is having this effect on both industries. And I think one of the things that I was happy to see is how it transformed Hollywood's perception about Israel. So having so many executives and directors and creators and heads of networks and the Hollywood community actually traveling to Israel. And it doesn't matter if it didn't happen because they're Jewish, non-Jewish, Zionist, not Zionist. They traveled because of financial possibilities. And then they saw Israel and they were like, oh my God, this place is amazing. So Kevin Frazier from Entertainment Tonight, I took him to Israel to shoot a game show with CBS. I mean, not I personally, we took him together. There was a group of us, we sold the television show to CBS, a game show. Kevin was the host, and we flew over a bunch of contestants and the entire CBS executive level. And they had the best time. And Kevin and I are still like, oh my God, he's like, Israel is amazing. It's so right. So, and that's something that you can't fake that. Like, you have to bring people over. You have to make sure that they see the country. And once they do, they're like, all right, I'm in.
Well, okay. So thank you for saying that. For those who don't know, you were one of the people to start a trip to Israel called Reality. And what's so cool is, like, we'll be on Clubhouse, Noah and I, in a room on a totally different subject matter, and some big executive in some industry or huge celebrity or whatever, activist in some regard, or artist or musician will be like, oh yeah, I went to Israel because of Reality. So can you talk about, you've been an early believer in that, of just having to bring different people to Israel, and any stories about that or anything you want to say?
Yeah, that is, I think, is still one of the most powerful ways to connect people to Israel, whether Jews or not Jews. It's a long story in how it actually started, but it started through my membership and partnership and friendship with a group called Summit Series, which is an organization for entrepreneurs and by-pollination of ideas. Amazing group of people that I met in 2008 when they were very, very young and very small, and they became my crew of people, like, really good friends of mine. And I took them to Israel, and when I came back, everybody in the community was like, wow, take us to Israel as well. This was so amazing, because they had the best time over there. And then I basically brought over the Schusterman Foundation. So Lynn Schusterman, who's like one of the most incredible human beings in the world, and Summit Community, because I thought that getting people through the Summit Community to come to Israel were exactly the people that I thought we need to reach. So the young professionals, the skewing liberals, not only, but skewing liberals, the ones that come from all walks of life. The Reality trip, we built it such that it's not me, it's we. There's a bunch of us that helped create it. So we built it such that it's 50-50 Jews, non-Jews. It's very professionally skewed. It's divided to there's reality sports, reality Latin, reality music, reality tech, there's a bunch of these kind of trips. It's very high level individuals. And we did the first trip. I helped design the first trip and brought the people together, like created the crew and the team and the trip and the whole thing, and basically merged Summit and Schusterman for the first time, and then was involved in the second one as well, and then the third, and then it kind of like, I got pregnant, and it continued on its own in the most extraordinary ways, because they say that a project is successful when it doesn't need you. So it was just like, oh my God, this is amazing, and that you don't need to beg people to come to Israel anymore; they're begging you to come. And then it was amazing, because within a year and a bit, I started just running into people in LA who would be like, oh my God, I just got back from Israel with this amazing trip called Reality. And I'd be like, I'm so happy to hear that.
That is so amazing, where they don't even know that you were involved in starting it.
No idea. I don't know that I helped put it together. And, but it's doing what I dreamt that it would, so I hope it continues. I mean, obviously it will continue. I hope it start up again soon, because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I'm going on the next one with you. Okay, Zach, any other questions?
Yeah, we have one here, and it looks like we have a few more minutes left. So this is your chance to sneak that last question in. So Noah, you've spoken pretty extensively about that aha moment in that cab in Netanya. Did you have a similar aha moment as it came to your book and the inspiration behind it?
Such a great, wow, love this question. So I didn't in the same way, but I did have a, oh no moment. I'll tell you about it. So the thought that I need to write this book kind of crept in throughout the years. I was like, oh my God, I need that book. I need that book that's easy. I need that book that's fun. I need that book that makes it has a meta conversation. Like, why am I able to sit with anybody and after 20 minutes explain to them exactly what Israel's about, and they can't find this anywhere else? And I kept having this kind of thought in my mind that I need to do this. But it was January 17, 2019 that do you know the story, Danielle?
No, but that's my birthday, so I'm smiling.
No, really? Aw, see? Now I'm concerned that it's not 16. I'll take a look at my day in my calendar. Anyway, let's make it January 17th because it's a better story. It's Danielle's birthday.
Yeah.
Great.
It's me and Michelle Obama's birthday. So
I'm not surprised.
yeah.
I'm really not surprised. This makes a whole bunch of sense. So I was in DC, in Washington, DC, and I had I went up there for a meeting, and I took that meeting. And in the evening I went to have dinner with a very close friend of mine who's he's he's very connected in like the Jewish world / politics world in DC, a really good friend. And we were having dinner and chatting about stuff. And he's like, what are you working on? And I said, oh, I'm working on this and this and that and whatever. And, actually I had this idea to write this book about Israel. It's kind of like a modern take, like to explain to people what Israel's about, like in a modern language and like just kind of like a new version of what is Israel about? Why should they care? How and why it came to be, and just make it easy to read, make it fun and popular, pop culture and whatever. And he went, wow, that's actually a great idea. You should do that. And I'm like, yeah, I should do that. The next day he calls me up and he said, so I took the liberty and I told this big DC based agent about your book, and he thinks it's an amazing idea. He'd like to read a proposal. To which I went, oh, whoa, I better write a proposal then. And that's how it happened. I went back to my notes. I kind of looked through, where did I write my notes? I'm like, okay, went online. How do you write a book proposal? Oh, that's how you're, okay, great. Started plugging it in, wrote the proposal as quickly as I could. And this is how it happened. So that friend is he's responsible for like igniting this thing that happened relatively quickly. And
then, in the pandemic, you're writing because it's on its way, and write chapters, and then you just move on to the next.
I do. And it's not bad to finish a book in the pandemic because there's no FOMO. Nobody's doing anything. So let me change that. When the lockdown happened in March, obviously my son was out of school. So I kind of knew right away that mothers are going to be getting a serious hit from this, which we did. So I had to take care of the household and him and cooking 3 meals a day for all of us. And it was a lot. But then after maybe 5-6 weeks, I got into the groove of like pandemic life. And I'm like, all right, let me carve out times to finish the book. I had a few more chapters to go and I needed to do the editing and all that. So basically I finished the book and submitted it in the pandemic. And there was, once his school came back and like it kind of calmed down, it was not a bad thing to do. It was, also once the fear subsided a little bit, because I think the reason that I found it so difficult to write at the beginning was because we were all so scared. Like it was just the first couple of months were just mortifying because we didn't know what to expect. So for a few weeks, I didn't write anything. I spoke to my agent and my publisher, and I'm like, you guys, I can't write. Like first of all, what they said is that none of our authors is actually submitting right now. Everybody is blocked. So for first few weeks, everybody was kind of like in shock. And what I felt at the beginning of the pandemic is that the stakes were so high at the beginning that having a creative outlet with high stakes was very difficult. Because it's like, wait, are we all going to die in a like a kind of like a horror film kind of way?
What am I writing this for if there's not going to be a tomorrow?
A little bit.
Yeah.
But after a few weeks, once it settled down and we're like, all right, here's a way to be careful. Here's a way to kind of like live your life kind of parallel to it while taking all the precautions. And then I went back to writing and finished the last few chapters and sent it out and got the edits and all that. So did it while all of us were sitting at home. And it's actually in the book. At the end of the book, there's a scene from that.
It's a good part.
Yeah.
One of my faves. Okay, Zach, what next?
So I think this might be a pretty fun one to end on. A little abstract, but I think we can have fun with it. Regina asks, can you describe in your own words what an Israeli soul is?
Wow. I've been in a lot of rooms with you and conversations, and we haven't gotten that question yet, Noah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. So hang on. In the book, what chapter is it? There's a chapter called May the Melting Pot Not Melt Us All, which is about the Israeli personality.
You want to take a minute to find it?
I'm not going to find it. I talk about, in the book, I talk about the Israeli personality and what I think had created this kind of like melted pot dish mishmash of a mutt, that's mixed with like all origins and cultures and natures and all of that. But on a soul level, I think the biggest thing that is the biggest, most unique thing about Israeli culture to me is the concept of Arvut Hadadit, which is the one for all and all for one, like the culture of being there for one another. And I think on a soul level, there's a very, despite how divided Israel is, as the rest of the world is showing up to be right now, there's still, you will be there for your community and your friends in a way that is very unique to the country that I've seen here, Danielle, but not a lot, not as a general kind of, when there's a Shiva in Israel, not just the friends and family and like colleagues, but like the entire neighborhood will come over and bring food. And you know what I mean? Like nobody asks you, they just knock on the door, they hand over food, they come over, they clean your kitchen, and then they walk out, and that's something that is, it's very unique and it's beautiful. Again, I'm sure I'm going to have a better answer as soon as we hang up.
No, I think that's a beautiful answer. I think, we all are saddened and troubled when, listen, we've gone through so many elections. You know a lot more about that than I do. And seems like there's a lot of infighting, but I like when you talk about it and you say like, we're too much of a democracy. How do you phrase it?
Well, I phrase it in Israel. I've been saying this before the last 4 election, going on the 5th, that Israel is such a flourishing democracy. It's virtually ungovernable. And I've said this before, it's like the way it's so democratic in the context of the Middle East being so undemocratic, like Israel is so democratic, you can barely govern. And it's, I'm saying it in jest and it's funny, but it's serious, but it's also like it's a uniqueness about the country that it, anybody can start a party, anybody can get elected, anybody can, lead the country if they get enough votes.
But there is that underlying when I was going to use like an SHIT word, I shouldn't probably, but when things
trying really hard to not, me,
things hit the fan, people stick together, and I hope that's something my kids, even though they're not Israelis or being raised in Israel, learn. Stick together, help each other, be good to one another.
That is definitely something that's very prominent in Israel. Despite the tribes, despite the tribalism within the country, there's still, and you see it even with the fight against COVID. For most parts, excluding the Haredi community, which were doing their own thing, which wasn't great. People in Israel know what it's like to be in war, and they realized that a mask didn't become a political statement. Staying at home didn't become like a political circus. Like, it's not like, don't do this. It's like, no, okay. Like they begrudgingly did what they were asked to do. Like, oh God, we have to go back into quarantine. Okay, well, it's a war. Got to do what we got to do. And they did. And they did.
Zach, do we have anything else?
No, that wrapped up and it looks perfect timing wise.
I just want to ask Noah, what are you doing to celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut?
I am zooing. I'm zooing.
You're zooing. It feels like a zoo, right?
I'm zooing a million Zooms is what I'm doing. A million Zooms. I'm gonna have a lot of and I'm a million Zooms in a clubhouse. Hummus Thursdays.
Perfect answer. So anyone who hasn't downloaded the app, do it. I heard they're opening to Android now. So
oh, really?
For everyone now.
And anyone who didn't order the book yet.
Yeah, this book is so funny, and it's the perfect gift for a high school student or a college student. So think about getting it for all the graduates in your life.
Mother's Day is coming up too.
Mother's Day, basically any occasion. Let's just support Noah in this book. so nice to celebrate anyone, especially someone like you, who's a proud Israeli, who's out in the world creating and doing beautiful things, and you make us all so proud. Your reason to celebrate in Yom HaAtzmaut, Noa. We adore you.
Oh God. Oh, I wish I had the flag. Ari brought a flag from, where's the flag? Oh crap. Sorry. I would have waved the flag.
Your book is like the flag with the color and the, okay, so we're a minute to 1 o'clock on LA time. Both Noa and I are in LA. So I'll just wish everyone around the world who's watching, you know, a meaningful Yom HaZikaron and a beautiful and joyous Yom HaAtzmaut. And we look forward to our next Schmoozic. Stay tuned for more notifications about that and future programs. Thanks for being with me.
Nice to be with you all, and nice to be with you, Danielle. I'll talk to you in a sec.
Call me. Bye.
Bye.